Some folks will tell you life changes in the grand moments. A wedding, a death, a fortune gained or lost. I've learned it's often the smaller moments, the quiet knock on a door or the shadow filling a threshold, that shift the ground beneath your feet forever. If you believe a single conversation can reroute a person's whole future, then make sure you like and subscribe, because you'll understand exactly what I felt the day Boaz Cutter came to my schoolhouse and told me something no man had dared say before. It was the first Friday of October, the kind of day where the Wyoming sky is so sharp and blue it almost hurts your eyes to look at it. The wind smelled of dry grass and far-off snow, and every instinct I had told me winter would come early this year. I was at the chalkboard, tapping a multiplication problem for young Tommy Fletcher, when the heavy thud of boots sounded on the porch outside. At first, I thought it was a parent come to fetch a child early. The cattle drives had been rough that week, and families often pulled their youngsters out to help with work before the storm set in. But this was no hurried knock. No, this was a slow, measured approach, each footfall deliberate, as though the man outside knew exactly how much space he was about to take up in my life. I smoothed my skirt out of habit. At 33, I'd learned to present a calm face to the world no matter what swirled beneath it. 8 years as Red Fern Ridge's schoolteacher had trained me well. I knew my place in town, knew what people whispered about the spinster teacher who poured her whole life into other people's children. I told myself I was fine with it, that I didn't need a husband or the kind of home that echoed with laughter in the evenings. Lies told often enough start to sound like truth, until something, or someone, reminds you they're not. The door opened, and the light from the prairie spilled in around a silhouette that could have blocked out the sun if it tried. Boaz Cutter stood there, hat in hand, filling my doorway like a living monument to a life I'd never dared imagine for myself. He was tall, so tall the lintel above his head seemed too low, broad through the shoulders in a way that made you think of timber beams holding up a house. The kind of man people in town talked about with a mixture of awe and wariness. I'd seen him before, of course. Everyone had. The largest ranch in 3 counties was his, along with a reputation for being a man who could gentle a wild horse or stare down a wolf without flinching. But I'd never been this close. Close enough to see the lines at the corners of his eyes, the faint silver at his temples, the steady weight of his gaze. "Miss Wyn," he said, voice low and slow like distant thunder. I told the children to keep working, stepped out onto the porch, and shut the door behind me. The wind caught my hair, tugging strands loose from the bun at my nape. He didn't glance at them, didn't look anywhere but at me. "I reckon this is going to sound strange," he began, "but I hear you're alone." It wasn't a question, and I didn't answer. He tipped his hat slightly, and I saw something shift in his eyes. Not softness, exactly, but a kind of finality. "Let me give you sons, Mississippi." The words hit harder than a blizzard wind. No, how do you do? No polite lead-in. Just a proposition laid bare in the autumn air. My first thought was that I'd misheard. My second was that the man was mad. My third came from somewhere deeper. A place I hadn't let myself touch in years. A place where the idea of children, my children, still flickered like a stubborn flame. "I don't understand," I said finally. "I've got a ranch that needs a woman's hand," he told me plainly. "Winter's coming, and it's a hard one this year. You've got no one to see you through it, and I've got no wife. We could fix both our problems in one go." It should have sounded cold, even insulting, reducing marriage to little more than barter. But there was no mockery in his tone, no honeyed charm meant to sway me. Just truth. A truth that stared straight at the life I'd built, respectable, quiet, and achingly lonely, and asked if I was truly content to live and die inside it. "You hardly know me," I said, though the words lacked the strength I'd meant for them. "I know enough," he replied. "You've kept the school running here for 8 years, and that tells me more about your grit than most men could learn in a lifetime. I know you work hard. I know you tell the truth. And I know you're tired of walking home to an empty house." That last part sliced for me, not because it was untrue, but because he'd seen it. How many others had seen and politely ignored it? Beyond him, the prairie rolled away toward the horizon, cold under the sun, wild and untamed. His words seemed to belong to that land. Honest, harsh, but with the promise of something solid if you dared take it. "What exactly are you proposing?" I asked, my voice steadier now. "Marriage," he said simply. "Not for love, not yet. For respect. for building something together. And yes, for sons. Strong ones who will see us both through our winters. Inside the schoolhouse, the children's voices drifted through the glass, scraping chalk, murmured answers. My life was in there, small and ordered, safe. Out here was something else entirely. I thought of the ring in my jewelry box, my mother's wedding band, kept more out of habit than hope. I believed I'd never wear it. Yet standing there with the wind lifting my hair, and this giant of a man watching me like I was already part of his life, I realized I wanted to at least consider what it might feel like to put it on. I need time, I told him. Take it, he said, settling his hat back onto his head. But don't take too long. Winter doesn't wait. He tipped the brim in farewell, then walked to a massive bay gelding tethered to the fence. In a single smooth motion, he swung into the saddle, turned toward the horizon, and rode away without another word. I stood on the porch long after he disappeared, the boards cool under my hands, the air smelling of sage and cold earth. Inside, my pupils carried on with their sums, oblivious to the fact that their teacher's world had just been tilted on its axis. For the first time in years, I wasn't entirely certain what the next season would bring, or if I'd spend it alone. Boaz Cutter's words didn't leave me that evening. They lingered like the scent of wood smoke after the fire's gone cold, impossible to ignore no matter how many times you tell yourself it's gone. I'd set out my lesson plans for the next day, lit the small lamp in my kitchen, and tried to focus on correcting spelling papers, but my mind kept circling back to the sound of his voice when he'd said it. "Let me give you sons, miss." I was still turning the phrase over when I noticed the folded paper on my table. I hadn't seen him hand it to me. Somehow, in that brief exchange, he'd managed to leave me with a document, the marriage contract. My fingers hovered over it a long moment before I unfolded it. The handwriting surprised me. Neat, deliberate, the work of a man who cared about the shape of things. It was all there in black and white. The terms, the allowances, the understanding that we'd begin with separate quarters, and, if I wished, I could keep my position as schoolteacher. His side of the bargain was clear: provision, protection, respect. Mine was equally plain: manage the household, stand beside him in public matters, and in time, perhaps, children. No poetry, no promises of eternal love, but no lies either. I sat back, reading it again, the edges crisp against my fingers. It should have repelled me, this clinical approach to something as sacred as marriage. Yet I found it oddly comforting, two people agreeing on a course without illusions. By morning, the whole town knew he'd come to see me. That's the way of a place like Red Fern Ridge. 300 souls who share the same sky, the same dirt, and the same appetite for knowing everyone else's business. Mrs. Henderson from the Mercantile was the first to come calling, cheeks flushed with gossip. "Abigail," she said, eyes bright, "tell me it's true, that Boaz Cutter stood right there in your schoolhouse and asked you to be his wife." I made tea to give myself a moment, but there was no point pretending otherwise. "It's true," I told her. Her teacup clattered in its saucer. "Well, my word. And what did you say?" "That I consider it." Her brows pinched together in the kind of frown meant to hide worry under propriety. "He's a fine man in many ways. But Abigail, marriage without love? Are you sure?" The question sat between us like an uninvited guest. I wanted to tell her I'd been sure of many things once, and they'd turned to dust in my hands. That love, as I'd understood it, had walked out of my father's parlor years ago wearing another man's ring. But instead, I said, "I'm 33 years old. I have no family and no prospects. Mr. Cutter is offering me a chance at something different." She didn't approve. I could see it in the tight line of her mouth. But she didn't press, and when she left, I returned to the contract, reading and rereading until I knew every word. The next morning, I walked to his ranch. The Cutter place sat in a natural hollow between two low hills, with a view of the sunrise that could stop you mid-step. I found him near the corral, mending tack with that same quiet focus I'd seen in his eyes. "I've made my decision," I said, drawing the paper from my reticule and handing it to him. His eyes scanned my signature, and the tension in his shoulders eased almost imperceptibly. "You're certain?" "As certain as anyone can be about the unknown. But I have conditions." He nodded once. "Name them." "I'll keep teaching, at least for now. And separate bedrooms at the start." "Agreed," he said, without hesitation. "Anything else?" "Yes. You'll respect the woman I am now, not try to change me into someone else's version of a wife. Something softened in his expression then. Abigail, I asked you because of who you are. I don't want a different woman. 2 weeks later, we stood in Reverend Matthew's church. I wore my good blue wool dress, the one that brought out my eyes, and carried a small bouquet of wildflowers he'd gathered himself, golden black-eyed Susans and purple asters. The vows were plain, without talk of cherishing or love, but when he lifted my hand to his lips at the end, the touch was so unexpectedly gentle that my throat tightened. The wagon ride to the ranch was quiet. Not awkward, exactly. Just full of the weight of what we'd done. The house surprised me. Large, solid, and clean, with a bookshelf stocked with Shakespeare and Emerson, a small upright piano in the parlor, and a room prepared for me upstairs with a writing desk positioned to catch the morning light. I want you to be happy here, he said, watching my reaction. This benefits me greatly, and I don't want you thinking you've gotten the lesser end of the bargain. That night, we ate beef stew and fresh bread he'd made himself. We spoke about my students and his cattle, the weather, and the coming winter. His eyes stayed steady on mine, and I realized that for all his bluntness, this man listened. Truly listened. It wasn't love, not yet. But as I went to sleep in that east-facing room, the prairie wind whispering through the eaves, I wondered if perhaps the seeds of something more had been planted. It began with the sound of hooves, slow at first, then growing into the hard, deliberate rhythm of men riding with purpose. From the upstairs window, I counted 5, Marcus Blackwood in the lead, his eyes fixed on our ranch like he already owned it. The forged deed I'd found was tucked against my skin, warm from my body heat, as if the paper itself had a pulse. Boaz stood in the yard, rifle at his side, the picture of calm. He'd placed our friends and allies where they couldn't be seen. Dr. Morrison by the barn, Reverend Matthews in the cottonwoods, the rest covering the flanks. My pistol lay ready on the sill before me, its weight both foreign and strangely reassuring. Blackwood reined in 20 feet from my husband. Last chance, Cutter, he called. Sign over the north pasture, and no one gets hurt. Boaz didn't move. It's my land. Blackwood's gaze slid toward the house, toward me in the window. Even if it means your pretty wife won't see spring. I stepped forward where he could see me clearly, my voice cutting through the cold air. You've already made one mistake, Mr. Blackwood. You assumed I'd scare easy. You were wrong. I drew the forged deed from my bodice and held it high. The territorial authorities will find this very interesting. The seal of a man who's only been licensed 3 years, on a document dated 23 years past. His face darkened, his hand twitching toward his gun. That was all it took. Boaz raised his rifle. Our hidden allies stepped out with weapons leveled, and the air seemed to tighten like a rope ready to snap. For a long moment, no one breathed. Then, with a curse, Blackwood jerked his reins, wheeling his horse away. His men followed, their silhouettes shrinking against the horizon until they vanished into the dust. I came down the stairs to find Boaz still standing in the yard, his rifle lowered but his eyes searching mine. You all right? He asked. I am, I said, and I meant it. He stepped closer, his hand warm against my cheek. We'll have more trouble from him. Then we'll face it, I replied. The way we face everything, from now on. The winter came early that year, but inside our home the fire burned steady, and for the first time since I'd come to Red Fern Ridge, I knew I wasn't alone in the fight.